China succeeds because of its government, and you documented this. India succeeds despite its government. So one guy got fed up with me. He said, come on, Kishore, what's going to happen if these things get worse? I said, there'll be chaos. He replied, in India, we have chaos every day. That there was a border war fought between China and India in 1962. Most Indians are aware of this. So there is a certain obsession in India about China, but you don't have the obsession in China over India. It's an asymmetrical relationship. The future of Asia will depend on one big question. Can China and India get along? Because these are the two biggest societies.
Get ready for an eye-opening conversation between Professor Kishore Mahbubani and Professor Zhang Weiwei from Fudan University. Trust me, this dialogue will transform the way you see the rivalry and relationship between China and India. It's packed with insights you won't want to miss.
So now I got one interesting question for you. And you mentioned correctly the ethnic Indian Americans were extremely successful in the United States. Yet if we look at the country of India itself, I was there 3 times. And I feel that how to really allow this potential of the Indian people to be channeled into modernization and successful nation building, it's really a daunting challenge. From my Chinese point of view, a certain stage of social reforms or even revolutions may be called for, excuse for my Chinese bias, such as women's liberation, land reform. Of course, at constitutional level, India has abolished the caste system, yet still permeating the society. So how to overcome this kind of social conditions so that the potential of Indian people can be really mobilized and to build a successful nation?
You're absolutely right. China is ahead of India in many areas. Anyway, China's GNP, I don't know if you know this, is 5 or 6 times the size of India's GNP. It's much bigger. You've had land reform, you've had a tremendous amount of social reforms, and India will have to catch up with China. But let me explain why India, I think, is going to make it. Because I must tell you, by the way, that India is a very, very different society from China. I'll give you one example. They say that China succeeds because of its government, and you documented this. India succeeds despite its government. Very different. But it succeeds. India is chaos. And on a daily basis, you have chaos. And I'll tell you one story. At the height of the financial crisis, I was in India giving a speech to the Pan IIT Congress. And that's a very significant congress. The Indian Institutes of Technology, by the way, are the one institution that have delivered more American CEOs than any other institution. Indian Institute of Technology. All the top CEOs in America come from Indian Institute of Technology. So I was at the Congress speaking to this group at the height of the financial crisis. And I was sitting with a group of Indian businessmen at lunch, and he said, aren't you worried? Big financial crisis, countries collapsing. And they didn't look worried. So I said, come on, aren't you guys worried? So one guy got fed up with me. He said, come on, Kishore, what's going to happen if these things get worse? I said, there'll be chaos. He replied, in India, we have chaos every day. So it's a very different environment. But I can tell you that I'm a student of Karl Marx. I spent a year studying Marx in Canada. Karl Marx actually documented brilliantly how capitalism really created incredible social changes. And in Europe, feudalism was destroyed by capitalism, right? It was the Industrial Revolution that put capital in the capitalists, and the feudal class lost power. The same thing is happening in India too. And you can see there was a fantastic page 1 New York Times story, which I cited in one of my books, about how the untouchables, as you mentioned, the lowest class in India, right, who were sort of, in a sense, had no hope. suddenly by participating in capitalism and markets, growing themselves, developing themselves, the class distinctions began to go. So in that sense, I would say Karl Marx provides part of the answer. And I can tell you one new thing that is happening in India, which is quite remarkable. India is not as far ahead as China, for example, on mobile payments. But the mobile phones are spreading in India, and the mobile phones are empowering poor Indians and giving them access to information, knowledge, connectivity that they never had before. So all these positive trends will lead to the development of India.
I was reading the other day the memoirs of your India's former Prime Minister Nehru. I have the feeling that when he encountered tough choices and difficulties, he first thought of his schoolmates, classmates, Cambridge, old school, boys' school, or whatever, club. That reminds me a constant comparison between China and India. I have many Indian friends. They always tell me English is India's advantage over China.
Yeah.
I always say, not necessary. My argument is this, at the technical level, yes, I agree. With English, you can communicate better with the rest of the world, with the West, with other countries. But at the strategic level, I always say, fortunately, Deng Xiaoping spent 6 years in France, but was not able to pick up the French language. So that allowed him to think in the Chinese way.
Yeah.
When you have a language from another culture, and which is really the language of the India's political, intellectual elites. Are you worried about what sometimes we call this colonization of mind? An example is when Deng Xiaoping went to Singapore, he was deeply impressed with the enormous progress Singapore has made. That was in 1978. China was way behind. But even at that time, Deng said, we should do better than Singapore, eventually. Same with the United States. We should learn from the United States, but don't always think, eventually, we should do better than the United States. Behind this is, he's from Chinese culture. And he knows very well this is a culture which was much more advanced than the West for so many hundreds and thousands of years. So this mentality is always there. We should do better, and we can do better. But in the case of India, very often, you are the exception. Many Indian scholars, politicians I met, really think, they feel so happy that they're accepted by the West.
Hey, if you're still watching, that means you're really into this. So thank you. But trust me, things are about to get even better. We're diving into some of the most eye-opening moments, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, and let's keep the conversation going. And if you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and makes sure you don't miss out on more awesome content. All right, let's jump back in.
Well, I got some good news for you. India is changing.
Good.
And you're right. In fact, I've written about this in my one of my first books, Can Nations Think, that long after the political decolonization of India happened in 1947, I think, but the mental colonization of India continued, as you said, and Indian elites kept looking at London to get answers for the future and didn't look east. But I would say in the last 20, 30 years, the prime ministers have all been saying, look east, act east, and there has been a reorientation. And I would say what makes Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, very, very unusual, is that in the past, all the Indian Prime Ministers would, when they went to speak at international forums, they would speak in English, as you said. And they would dress and they would wear a jacket and tie, like you and me, jacket and tie. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and I heard him in Davos in January this year, never speaks in English. He speaks in Hindi.
Yeah.
He says, I will speak my language. And you never see Prime Minister Modi wearing a jacket and tie. He's always wearing an Indian outfit. So what you call the mental decolonization, which is a critical process, is happening also in India. But at the same time, I would say in defense of English, especially for young people, I would say that don't underestimate the usefulness of English today. Because if you travel around the world, the one thing that you'll find when you arrive in Argentina or South Africa or Australia or Kazakhstan is that if you were looking for one common language to use, most of the time, most people would speak English. And as you know, when pilots fly across the sky, the language that they use when they get air traffic clearance is English, for example. So it is a very useful language still to have, and I wouldn't discourage people from learning it. But I completely agree with what you said about Mr. Deng Xiaoping, that we must aim to match what the West has done, and we must now try to do better. And in many areas, for example, if you look at the admissions into the top universities in the world, the Harvards, the Yales, the Stanfords, the Princetons, you'll find that Asians, including Asian Americans and non-American Asians, are very competitive. And when there's no racial quota, like in the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, 43% of the students are Asian. So the Asians have demonstrated very well that today, you put them in any situation, they can compete and they can do well.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Professor Zhang Weiwei and Professor Mahbubani. I think I'm a poor commentator, but I'm a good student here. I'm not gonna comment on that, but I'm gonna ask some student questions. Yes. First of all, I have to confess that I'm a very enthusiastic advocate for the collective rights of Asia because I practice this myself. I studied South Asia politics in US as a Chinese student. That's a very weird combination, but I did that. I just graduated from Johns Hopkins SAIS. So one question struck me when I was a student. That is, why should we be so optimistic about the future of Asia? If China and India rise at the same time, will the odds of the conflict increase or decrease? That's my question. And recently, I published one piece of article on the Global Times, you know that, Global Times. And the Indian people keep watching that, and Chinese people also read that closely. In the article, I said that China should help India to industrialize its economy, because industrialization is one of the most important elements of the China's rise. If China can help India to do that, then both of them can benefit tremendously from the process. That was my argument. But I got attacked by a lot of people, both Chinese and Indians. Chinese people attacked me because they argued, India is the other 1 billion size economy in the world. If India get industrialized, where should China be?
And let me guess, the attack from the Indian side is that why would we need Chinese help to industrialize in the first place? There we
because
go.
China tried to colonize us economically. Why should we let Chinese people help us?
Well,
There's no
yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So that's my question. Why, will the odds of conflict actually increase when there's a collective rise of Asia?
Now the questions on China and India are much more difficult to answer because I don't know how many of you know this, but the relationship between China and India is actually quite complicated. Most Chinese are not aware that there was a border war fought between China and India in 1962. Most Indians are aware of this. So there is a certain obsession in India about China, but you don't have the obsession in China over India. It's an asymmetrical relationship. But at the same time, the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has said the world is big enough for both China and India to grow. And I want to make just one point on China and India. The future of Asia will depend on one big question. Can China and India get along? Because these are the two biggest societies. China 1.4 billion, India 1.3 billion. By 2050, India's population will be bigger. So if the two most populous countries, China and India, don't get along, then Asia is in trouble. So it's very important that the young people of India and the young people of China make a huge effort to overcome the recent untroubled history and remember that before the period of Western colonial rule, when the Asian countries lived side by side, you had 2,000 years of peace between China and India. China and India never fought a war for 2,000 years. So that long history is far more important when you look ahead, and we should not be bothered about what happened in the last 50 years.
If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.